Hello, everyone. My name is Douglas Brown, and thank you for joining our virtual roundtable event. I am the CEO at Halo Consulting, a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago that provides a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo is founded to provide the process-oriented best practices our team developed at top executive search firms with a cost-conscious scrappiness that you'd expect from a boutique or startup. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we hope you'll be interested in attending our future events. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function in the toolbar, and we'll address those questions throughout the webinar or potentially at the end. And we will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we'll have a recorded version of this event available on YouTube as well. For now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And I will share my screen here. All right, so the first panelist I would like to introduce is Rory Trotter. Over the last decade, Rory has led compensation and benefit teams responsible for the design and delivery of global total rewards programs at two different large publicly traded multinational companies. In his role today, Rory serves as a secretary to the compensation committee of the Brown-Forman board of directors, serving as management's liaison to the board on all compensation and benefit matters. He also leads the strategy, design, and delivery for Brown-Forman's global and executive compensation operations and performance functions, roughly 5,000 employees in 40 plus countries. And he's also charged with building a pay strategy that attracts, engages, and motivates world-class talent to achieve shareholder support to support business objectives. Next, I'd like to introduce Wendy Verploegen. Wendy is a total rewards leader with over 20 years of experience, including deep compensation experience in broad-based sales incentive and executive pay programs. She's worked in the retail and wholesale grocery, semiconductor, and medical device industries that now serves as the vice president of total rewards at Entrust Corporation, with just under 3,000 global employees. Entrust is a privately held company focused on securing a world in motion through trusted identities, payments, and data protection. And the last speaker I'd like to introduce is Nicole Baker. Nicole has spent the last 15 years helping organizations build total rewards strategy and programs to enhance the employee experience and create scalability. She is passionate about elevating employee well-being through unique benefit design and team member education. Nicole recently joined Diligent as the vice president of total rewards and HR operations based out of Denton, Texas. And then lastly, I would like to introduce our moderator, Deonna Chambers. Deonna is the head of talent, diversity, and inclusion for ITG Brands. She is a human resource leader with over 15 plus years of experience in talent, diversity, and inclusion in HR management. She spent the span of her career working for E&J Gallo and Molson Coors. She has a passion for talent and a strategic eye for building high-functioning and diverse teams. The key to her success has been around having compassion for others, being a servant leader, and building strategic data-driven solutions. So wanted to share a brief intro about our speakers and our moderator. And Deonna, I'll go ahead and pass it to you to kick it off with the first question.
Absolutely. So really great topic today. I'm excited about this. And what we're talking about today is just very, very timely. So I will jump right in. So first, with 2021's Great Resignation, how are your teams dealing with the individuals leaving for higher paying positions?
I can go ahead and start. Hi, Wendy, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invite, Douglas. So I will start out by saying, honestly, I think I've spent more time in this last year working up counteroffers than collectively in the entirety of the rest of my career. It's just been volume that I've not seen before. It's just highly unprecedented, I would say. But I also will say that I think that most compensation people and HR professionals more broadly, I think I'm in the same camp with them, that I'm not necessarily a fan of counteroffering. I think that from my experience, they rarely work. I believe that they can also send the wrong message to employees. And so when someone's looking to leave for a higher pay position, I think that the position of you as an employer often needs to be one of supporting them in their career advancement and the opportunity to develop and follow something that they're passionate about. I don't believe that there's a lot of efficacy in trying to hold someone in a position that they've decided to move on from. The other thing that I'll say from people knowing what's available in the market, that's also at a higher level than ever before. I think employees are more willing to advocate for themselves. They have more information. And so they do come and ask about pay, and you should be in a position, hopefully, that if you know someone's paid low or compared to market, that you have a justifiable reason for that it's related to performance or experience or internal equity or skill level. All of those things come into play. And if you don't have that reason, then you should be making a concerted effort over time to elevate someone's salary to an appropriate level. But I do think if you counter, if somebody's just chasing money, you send the signal that we could have afforded to pay you more, but we decided not to for whatever reason. And the people that will stay for the money will eventually become dissatisfied again.
Well, I'll add a little bit to that because I completely agree with what Wendy's saying in terms of volume and efficacy. I think there's a lot of downsides to counteroffers. One of them is you're kind of implying to the employee you've been underpaying them this whole time. And so it might be retentive in the short term, but usually is not in the long term. And then the bigger, more far-reaching issue is that you're telling the rest of your workforce that they need to quit and get another offer in order for them to be paid fairly or get that promotion or whatever the counteroffer was, which is kind of the toxicity that we don't really want amongst our workforce. And what I've seen over the last probably 18 months is that being proactive in terms of making market adjustments and addressing internal equity issues costs far less than these counteroffers. Counteroffers almost always cost you more because this other company is already bringing them to market or above market. And so in order for you to do a counteroffer, you're going to have to match or beat it. So it's much more prudent to try and take a proactive kind of market adjustment strategy than kind of whack-a-mole counteroffers.
Can I follow up with that? And maybe Rory or Nicole, when do you think that you can be successful with them? Because I've seen it happen very rarely, but where I've seen it really work is when it's a real honest and meaningful conversation that someone who's highly engaged, devoted to the company, loves the work they're doing, loves the team and the culture, the environment, but they know what the market is and they believe they're paid below that. When they come and have a conversation with their manager and say, listen, I can't ignore this anymore, financially, it doesn't make sense for me, but I love to be here. That's when I think we're more successful at countering or giving a pay bump in those situations, and it takes that pay issue off the table for that employee. I'm just wondering what your experience is.
I would agree with that. I would say that the point in time where counteroffers tend to be successful is when pay is the only reason that the employee seeking an opportunity. Far too often, I'd say most of the time, there's something else that the employee is dissatisfied with, and the opportunity that they're looking at not only offers opportunities for an increased pay, but also career advancement. The places where I've seen it successful is, to your point, an employee reaches out to their manager or leader, says, hey, spirit of transparency, I'm having some conversations here. Here are some of the numbers that are being thrown around. I value my career at company X. What can we figure out? I will say that I've also seen counteroffers be successful when there are other underlying reasons, when management is also willing to make an investment from a talent standpoint in looking at that employee's development and figuring out how they can accelerate the trajectory of that employee's career in concert with pay. Absent one of those two scenarios coming together, eventually, an employee that you give a counteroffer to today is gone, 9 months, 12 months later.
Absolutely. So next question, total rewards has become a critical retention tool. What strategies are you focused on today to retain top talent? Let's start with Nicole.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts here. So, I think what we're all experiencing in the compensation space is how to deal with companies that are willing to just buy talent. So they're willing to pay well outside of what we're seeing in market data. And for a lot of comp professionals, we don't want us to just chase that and continue to just escalate the pay. So what we've had to do at organizations I've been at is had to get creative about other ways to be attractive and retain people. And so, a lot of companies are, needing to lean in really hard on flexibility and remote work and, mobility, enhancing leave options. And so, that's been one way that companies are kind of trying to differentiate themselves in terms of, not just throwing cash comp at the problem. And one thing that I have seen be really successful, but is kind of a little bit labor intensive sometimes, is to identify what the demographic, you're trying to hire, you're trying to retain, would value a lot in terms of a unique benefit, whether that be a student loan program or childcare program, caregiver programs. If you can bolt on some things that are really differentiating, then that can be something your talent acquisition team and your internal HR business partners can really sell.
I think that also, Rory really touched on the fact that people aren't usually leaving just based on compensation. Compensation usually isn't even in the top 5 of factors as to why they leave. And so when you think about life, in the organizations I've worked with, it's really been about how do we make the lives of our employees a bit easier, right? They're working hard every day. What can we do to provide a little bit of ease? And so some of the benefits I've seen have been simple: no dress code, or let's not wear a suit anymore every single day to work. Things such as a discount program. I've even seen things like canine colleague programs where you can bring your dog in once or twice a week so you can stop running home to walk it during lunch. And so depending on where you work, you can get really creative with benefits, and some of these don't cost a thing. No dress code doesn't cost a dime, right? And so you can get really creative and just make the ease of the day just better for the employee, just based on, much like Nicole said, the demographic. What is it that they're calling for? What is it that they're asking for? And are we really listening? All right.
I would just add that I agree with everything you said, Deonna. As far as specific things that we're doing at Brown Forman today, I would say one, it is echoing your point, recognizing that you may not always be able to be a premium pay company, but you can be a premium experience company. So yes, dress codes, even as it concerns flexible work environment. While we have reopened our offices at this point and are encouraging colleagues to come back into the office. Anybody that wants to have a predominantly home hybrid working arrangement can do so if their job allows. And so that's something that's been really well received by our employees. I'll also say that sometimes dollars that echoing Wendy's point, that you spend on the front end by doing proactive pay analysis can save you a lot of money on the back end. We just recently kind of completed a analysis for our global salary workforce, where we essentially market price each job by position class, which is an internal way to evaluate jobs relative to the external market and on individual market matches, and said, hey, we've got minimums. We're going to bring everybody to where it is appropriate. We're going to bring people to the midpoint, and the cost that we spend on that is going to be significantly less expensive than the cost that to Wendy's point you pay if somebody goes out and spends a good deal more money or gets a much more significant offer in the market afterwards.
The other thing I'd love to, oh, I'm sorry, Wendy, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think a lot, it's interesting when you talk about, doing things that make a worker's life better day to day. So dress code, but I think also it's around non-standard work hours, days in the office, days at home, the hybrid environment, all of those things, but making the work environment work for the person and their personal life and what they value, how they like to work, that's come into play more than ever. And I think it's interesting because we saw the big, Silicon Valley, the bringing all of the service elements into the workplace on site so that employees could get their dry cleaning done. And you had an on-site daycare and you had a gym and you had locker rooms and you had all of the things that so you never had to leave. And they were trying to capture the work and get the most work out of everybody, 14 hours a day, because you never had to leave. We did everything for you. I really believe those days are over. Employees don't want that. They want to be able to have more balance, and they're demanding that. So I think that the things that we have to offer from a rewards perspective are around employee choice and giving people an opportunity to live and work cohesively in a way that they want and in a way that's best for them and their family and their situation, whatever those things are. But that flexibility, I think, is really paramount.
So you use the key word cohesive, right? And I think that everything we're talking about is incredibly important. But as we're in our different organizations, let's talk a little bit about how we equip senior leaders across our enterprise to deliver that cohesive and consistent message around our total rewards policy.
I mean, I think everything we've talked about doesn't matter if your employees don't know about it. So it can't be retentive if they're not aware. So the way that I've been successful in kind of cascading that message down is twofold. So we've got, obviously we have to have the right message at the top. So we've got to equip our top leaders with talking points on here's our comp philosophy, here's how we're addressing these things that are going to come, that we know we're going to come up in town halls, and making sure that that message is consistent and transparent. But equally as important is talking to our frontline managers and our middle level managers to make sure that they can reinforce that message, which can be really tricky because they can either reinforce it or they can undermine it. And so we've got to get their buy-in and their alignment. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what they're saying at the top. So part of how I've done that at organizations I've been at is we've spent time educating managers on how to talk about compensation, and not just at merit, because we all do it at merit, how to talk about it all year long, how to talk about questions that come up around internal equity or mental health, or we've got to give them the tools. And if you can equip them with the right resources and the right support, they are the best marketing team you could ever have in your organization.
Yeah, I agree. The idea that you have to train them on the fundamentals so that they understand what it is you have. What are you offering people? What's the pay philosophy or the benchmarking philosophy, your kind of go-to-market strategy around your reward package? But then more detail, what are our annual cycles? How do they work? When do they occur? How does someone get nominated for promotion? What is that process? What do I look for? And what are the tools that I have as a manager to be able to assess the talent on my team? And, do we have avenues to select someone for additional career development opportunities and project work and those kinds of things? But also then just the fundamentals. How does the pay structure work? What are the incentive programs? What are the additional recognition and reward opportunities? Give them their toolkit And like Nicole said, let them be the advocate for your programs and tell people, and I completely agree, that communication is the key. Your rewards programs, especially salary, it's the most expensive thing that your company offers, right? Outside of maybe the building and the equipment and those kinds of things, your other OpEx. But we spend so much money on it. And if we don't talk about it, it's not worth anything. Along those lines too, I think that companies are trying to become more transparent around pay. The companies, well, I think it's easy to be transparent around pay specifically when you have a good pay story to tell. Not everybody is a market leader, as Rory said. In fact, a lot of companies are coming from behind. You know, there's a reason it's the market median. That means half of the people are below that, right? So not everybody has a good pay story. And I think it's important that you don't shy away from being transparent just because your story is not that great. Tell what you can. Talk about your philosophy, talk about how you benchmark, talk about maybe what you're doing is aspirational, but you have goals, right? And our goal is to pay at the market median or above. Our goal is to pay our top talent above the market median. We have goals around pay equity, you know, talk about your gender pay equity studies and your position and tout the things that you are good at. Pay transparency doesn't mean that you have to tell everyone every pay range in the company and where they sit compared to a specific market number. I don't want to tell that story to anybody. But so it can mean lots of different things, but I think that part of that pay story and that transparency around all of your programs is important for your leaders to know and believe, and it helps build trust and credibility in what you're offering to your employees and help them know that you're treating them fairly and equitably.
I think that, Wendy, you touch on really great points because it's really a journey, right? And, you know, as you're speaking to people, there are going to be some people who are in a space where they're above and they're thrilled, and there may be others who are just below or right on it and they're not so. And I think the key, you know, is what is the journey? Like you said, what are we trying to do? And then really encouraging them and getting their support so that they're, you know, pushing the same message and aligned with you and making it happen. So thank you for that. Okay, so since the pandemic, we are hearing more about work-life balance and flexibility. How are companies adapting to the new normal, and what impact has it had on your total rewards teams? And how has that changed the strategy to compete for top talent?
Yeah, so I'll start there. I'll say that one of the interesting ideas that as an organization, we were focused on, I think a lot of other companies were, start with was, hey, with this new, flexible work, new normal, that there's a possibility to hire talent in cheaper markets to reduce labor costs by bringing fewer people into the office, et cetera. There are a couple of things that, we've at least found, or I found since the pandemic has kind of come and now hopefully for the most part gone, that have caused us to moderate that approach a little bit. The first is that when you're trying to build a diverse candidate slate and ensure that you've got the right talent, sometimes if you carve out higher cost of labor markets, those are the places where you might have the deepest diverse candidate pools. And so in those cases, we have sometimes said, hey, we're willing to spend additional money, even if we don't necessarily need to recruit somebody from a higher cost of labor market, because of the fact that we want to make sure that we've got a diverse workforce, and that we're able to kind of maximize the talent we're bringing into the organization. That said, setting aside that piece, something that we have seen a lot of value in is on a go-forward basis, essentially taking the position that a job doesn't need to sit in a physical office space. If we can bring in the best talent without compromising that candidate pool, looking at lower cost of labor markets, looking to have more remote workforces, and we've been able to do that to good effect. One thing that I will flag that I think makes that a little bit easier is that when we're looking at the market competitiveness of our positions as far as position midpoints. There are not too many places where we have very large workforces in markets like New York, and where we need to create a lot of separate pay structures or pay ranges. And so that's allowed us to keep relative internal equity for roles of the same function, while at the same time being able to reduce costs and allow more flexibility.
Perfect, thank you.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that the pandemic, that the work from home movement, to Rory's point about, having different geographic pay methodologies within a country, right? We know that Northern California and New York are higher cost of labor. And so most companies that use traditional pay structures use differentials to pay more in high cost areas. And I think what's interesting, and I've seen a little bit of a shift just in my network and the folks that I talk to around compensation, is that I believe that we're probably moving towards eliminating some of that you don't have, or you don't have to have as many. Maybe you still have the regular and the high, but you don't need 4 flavors in between anymore, because folks can work anywhere that they want. The other thing too that I think is interesting is the concept of changing people's pay as a result of that. I'm not a fan of that either. I think it's really risky. If someone says they're moving away from the Bay Area to Montana, are we really going to take $30,000 away from them in base salary and risk having them reconsider us as their employer? I don't know that that's the best approach. We're not doing that right now. I would be curious to know if Nicole and Rory, if you guys are actually actively changing pay, or you, Deonna, in your companies for people that choose to move.
We are not.
And we had to come up with a strategy around how to deal with the remote workforce. I know we got a question from somebody about how we're all dealing with kind of geographic differentials. And so, we, in all 50 states, needed a plan. We already had 6 geographic differentials just between kind of where we already had locations. And so what we decided to do was base wherever state you were in. If you were fully remote, we would take kind of the state average and use that to set the geographic differential for the state. That's not perfect, right? Because you've got, states like Illinois, where you might have wildly different cost of labor. Same thing with California, kind of wildly different across the different parts of California. But we also don't want to maintain 100 geographic differentials. So it's not perfect. We are not adjusting anybody down. We are adjusting people up if the business wants to support somebody who wants to move from, Texas to New York, where there's a, 25% difference. But we are not adjusting people down.
And to address this question around, one, I would say, yes, Wendy, we're not addressing people down. And either if an employee wants to move and it's not for a business reason, they've got to finance that relocation on their own. But once they get there, we're not reducing costs. From a pay equity standpoint, I'd say that at this point there hasn't emerged a significant difference that we're seeing between employees because they're moving to higher versus lower cost of labor markets. In general, if the company is facilitating that move, or that employee is living in a market in which their pay is specifically tied to that range, we'll sometimes call it as a separate line item. So there's actually a multiplier or a factor that's showing, hey, we're giving you more money because you're in this market. And if they were to move, we would reduce it. But as a general rule, today we've got 3 different geographic differentials, at least in the domestic United States. And for the most part, there tends to be some good pay parity there. There are not enough of those folks that are sitting in different functions to have created a significant issue at this point.
I think this is where comp ranges are really your saving grace, because there's somebody who had a question about you address it up but not down. Well, we dress it up as long as if they're below the midpoint. So if they're already paid above the midpoint and wherever they're going, we wouldn't adjust it up. But our comp philosophy says that we pay everybody within our range. And so if somebody's moving to a higher cost place and they're out of kind of whack in terms of the range, we'll adjust them up. I think the same thing in terms of internal equity. If somebody's moving somewhere where it's lower cost and now they're redlined, that just means, you might have some internal equity issues in, the short term, but they shouldn't be getting, adjusted and perpetuated in the long term.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit. So mental health's evolution beyond 2022. What options are resulting in a positive ROI, and any strategies companies should shy away from? Let's start with Nicole.
So I think we're in a really tough spot in total rewards with this, because on the one hand, we've got, all of the, population of employees who are burnt out, their well-being is at an all-time low. And on the other hand, we support these organizations who are having, higher attrition than ever before and recruiting challenges. And like what I've seen is we've created this kind of burnout hamster wheel where more people are having to take work because we can't retain people or we can't recruit fast enough. And then they burn out and then they go on leave or they leave the business. And it just creates this kind of churn. And so what we need to kind of the fine line we need to walk is how can we support our people's well-being and mental health in a way that doesn't, drive absence. Because what naturally we'd think is, well, people just need time, they just need a breather, they need time off, they need to not work so much. Well, that then creates this hamster wheel. So what I think is, it's not a, wild new idea, but I think is something that's really helpful is to kind of look at these virtual mental health platforms. I think that using, we've had EAP forever. Nobody uses EAP. Really, like you're lucky to get 2%. These are things that are app-based, that are not, they're not framed as mental health tools. They're framed as coaching. They're framed as mindfulness. So these things that like don't feel very clinical, but allow for people to get mental health support, and hopefully reduce the need for absence. And I think that we've seen these vendors like really up their game through the pandemic. Like they've evolved and enhanced and they've gone global. And like, I think we've seen that industry change. And that's really what kind of we're leaning into to try and help.
We have something similar. I think I agree. The vendor landscape is just exploded. And I while it's awful to see and experience the toll that the pandemic has had on people from a mental health perspective, the silver lining, I think, in all of that is the normalization of talking about it and talking about mental health being foundation of well-being, foundation of productivity and employee engagement at work. If our people aren't taking care of themselves mentally and physically and all those things, they're not going to give their best to us as the employer. And so back to the ROI piece, anything that we do to invest in programs that support that well-being is going to lead to greater productivity, greater results, et cetera. And I do think, as Nicole said, EAP, we've been offering mental health services as part of your benefits offering forever. People, some use it, some don't. But what has changed, I think, is the level of communication and messaging around what's offered. At Interest, we're really proud of something. We launched a mental health first aid program where we have colleagues from around the company that are trained and certified to assist and recognize people that are in crisis or that may have are experiencing, higher levels of substance abuse. We know that that's on the rise too with the pandemic. And what's really exciting to me is that the people that are trained and certified in this, it's not just the HR people that it normally would be. We've got engineers and manufacturing technicians, and these are folks that are in the business at all levels of the company that sit side by side with people that might need the assistance. And so they're trained to recognize it, they're trained to talk about it, they steer people to resources. And it's just, we're trying to make it make it organically grow as part of just how we work going forward.
I think other ways to make it organic is through employee resource groups. So as you think about people gathering around certain topics or certain demographics, I think that it really helps to be able to get people to sit down and talk about issues, whether it's personal or in the workplace, having focus groups and really flushing out those ideas so that the business could possibly provide a solution. You never know, again, just how simple a solution could be as long as we know the problem.
I will add that from a well-being standpoint, echoing Wendy and Nicole, your points that EAP programs have got very low utilization. I have found that the Brown Foreman did something where we had each member of our executive leadership team go out and speak to different areas of their business as part of these mental health huddles, around the midpoint of the pandemic, and just talk about their own experiences, with burnout, mental health, how they've used tools and resources, things that have been helpful for them. And I will say, I don't think it's really caused the Optum AP numbers to tick up very much, but it has changed the discussion and the way that employees talk about mental health internally. Deonna, to your point, ERGs can also be a fantastic space for people to have conversations around mental health and other topics that there may be a reticence to talk about in kind of more broad-based forums. And that's a place where we talk about mental health as well.
Thank you. So where do we think total rewards will be in the next 12 months? How about you, Wendy? What do you think?
It's changed so much. It's changed more in the last 2 years than, again, I've ever seen. So it's really tough to know what that crystal ball would be. But I do think, I mentioned before, employee awareness of what's happening in the marketplace, the resources that they have. There are websites where you can look at verified offer letters from people that do your same job at Google and Amazon, and you can compare what you're getting to almost any industry and big player out there looking at a verified offer letter. That level of awareness makes the total reward space, as total rewards professionals, we've got to up our game. We have to know what's out there. We have to, I think, gone are the days where we're doing annual benchmarking exercises. I think we have to do continual pulse checks. We've got to know what's happening in the market in the market where we compete for talent. What are other people offering? How do we compare to that? Are we willing to invest in it? So that's not a great answer about what I think is going to happen. But I think that our reaction to this very quickly evolving world is going to be one where we're going to be playing catch up for a little while, but we've got to arm ourselves with the right knowledge in order to figure out where to put the dollars that we have in the most meaningful way in an area that employees want and value. I don't have a better answer than that.
I agree with a lot of what Wendy said. I think we are moving towards an environment where we are going to have much more frequent comp cycles and much more specific comp ranges. And so I think the once a year salary surveys and once a year merit increase is gone. I think that's not a realistic approach, at least for now. And so I think the same thing with comp ranges, we're going to have to get creative about kind of premiums on specific skills, kind of do like hot skill premiums for specific things. And we're going to have a level of specificity that a lot of companies' comp structures don't allow for today, because we're seeing more differentiation in the market for very specific things. So what all of that means, to me as like a total rewards leader, is I think comp, while has always been kind of an integral part of, HR strategy, I think it is going to become a bigger, more important part of business forecasting. I think we are going to need a much more intentional seat at the table, and not just give them a, hey, I think it's going to be 3% next year, like load in a 3% merit. I think it's going to be much more nuanced, and comp's going to get the opportunity to be more strategic in terms of forecasting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd echo that. Inflation is at 40-year highs, and by all accounts, what most companies have done is opted to take a wait and see approach as opposed to trying to match those inflationary increases in the current cycle. So certainly in the short term, I think that we're going to have more frequent comp cycles, more sorts of short term bonuses to address pay. Brown-Forman actually just announced the other day that we're doing 4% of pay to all of our colleagues globally as a one-time special payment. And inflation was not the reason for that, but it certainly played into some of the discussions that were had around the topic. And so I think next 12 months we're going to see issues around pay being front and center, pay transparency, pay equity. I'd also say on the employee benefit side that I think I believe it was Wendy, to your point, there's going to be a greater focus on using some of these point solutions to address gaps that conventional well-being programs have not been able to serve, been able to be used to serve the needs of employees, particularly as more and more people are working from home on an ongoing basis.
Great. So Doug, I think we are ready to open up for questions.
Thanks, Deonna. So to the audience, if there are any questions that we'd like to address with our speakers today, please drop them in the Q&A. And that bar is on the bottom toolbar. So feel free to drop any questions. And I think there were a couple of questions that we can start to cover, Deonna, if you want to kick it off with those couple.
Right, let's see. I see a few things in the chat. Let me see there. All right, I see. What is your evaluation process for reviewing / supporting employees initiating moves?
Maybe I'll take a first pass, then we can hear, I'd love to hear what you guys do. So I think a lot of this comes down to how spread out you already are. So kind of our, my philosophy is if it is a jurisdiction we're already in, then we'll consider it. If it is a net new jurisdiction, whether that be a new state or a new country, then that's kind of a non-starter because of the cost and setup. It's just not worth it necessarily. Then if it's a jurisdiction we're in, which means we as HR can administratively support it, then it comes down to, can the job allow for it? Is there an impact to that team with, if you have a job as the male person, obviously that's not going to necessarily work. And then we do cost analysis, and the business has to decide if they want to support, our comp philosophy says they have to be in range, which means we're going to have to increase their pay 20% for them to move to New York. And, are you willing to support that? Because the business is going to bear the cost. And what we've seen is, for the most part, the business wants to allow people this flexibility. They know that it's an important retentive tool right now. And for a lot of people, they were already there and didn't even tell us. So we're kind of playing catch up in terms of making sure that they're coded correctly and all those things. But I think it comes down to, what can your business actually support? And do you have the system set up to pay taxes in Tennessee or wherever?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Generally speaking, in the U.S., if somebody wants to move and their job allows for it, we'll support it. If somebody wants to move to a different country, it's a question. To your point, Nicole, is there a legal entity there? Is there payroll set up to address it? Can we move them to that market in a way that's not going to be cost prohibitive? But as a general rule, where we can support those things, we do. The one thing that I think I will add or amend to my earlier statement was, while kind of in-country moves, there's not generally a look at somebody's pay if they're moving into a different market. If somebody is moving from, say, the UK to France, where social taxes are going to change and all these other elements are going to change, we will do a net-to-net pay comparison where we see, hey, are they going to take an economic loss or gain here? And if it's strictly an employee-driven move, we'll typically expect the employee to bear the cost of that transition.
Thank you. How do you respond to employees that expect their salary should move at the same rate as inflation? How do you respond?
I'm going to say not very well.
Yeah, it's
painful. It's so relevant, and we must get it. We're getting it more. We have some more experience, I think, with our South America colleagues than anywhere else. We've got some Venezuela and Argentina employees that have seen wild escalation of inflation and currency devaluation and other issues over the last couple of years. So we've gotten a little bit more practice answering there, but we've been kind of double down on our cost of labor model, and try to explain to employees that while we understand, cost of living and inflation that impacts your wallet, we can't pay salaries based on a market basket cost of goods. That's what inflation and cost of living is based off of. Everybody's needs are different, but our need as an employer is to manage labor costs and to pay something that we believe is market competitive, fair, and equitable. And so we double down on the philosophy and we repeat it over and over and over. It's not an answer they want to hear, so they're going to keep asking, but that's what we've got to work with.
So in February of this year, my organization, we actually engaged Mercer to help us answer this question, because we were so befuddled, we literally were saying the same thing Wendy just said over and over, and I couldn't figure out how to demonstrate it to our employees so that they would understand. And so the way we put stuff together for our CEO that showed how CPI has moved over the last, I think we did 15 years. And we saw when it went really down and when it's been up, and we've seen it just kind of heartbeat line, right? And then we showed how salary surveys trended. And then we showed how our organization's merit budget trended. And we really reinforced that we're here to give you stability. And we're here to be, to be a constant. We're not gonna, take your pay away when things are bad. And we're not gonna overreact when it's inflating. So we were able to show, do you really want your pay to just go up and down like crazy? Or do you want this kind of nice smooth line of, and we were beating the salary survey in every year. So I think that was a really effective way of showing them.
Yeah, I agree, Nicole. We did something similar in the sense that, yes, we shared the conversation around cost of labor and our pay philosophy and how we think about merit, but we also highlighted that employees don't really want us to just have merit increases track with inflation. As a general rule, the kind of merit structures in most countries tend to slightly exceed inflation, and employees have benefited from that for most of the last 10 years. And the talking point that we've had there is, hey, if we were to pay based on inflation each year, everyone would making a lot less money today than they do now. So that's something that has resonated, I think, with our employees.
Thank you. So pre-pandemic, we all had a comp philosophy. Has anyone changed their philosophy in the last 2 years, and how did you manage that?
We have not. It is interesting with the wild inflation that we've seen. I get that question a lot from leadership around, well, should we shift and target P75 for certain jobs or not? And I'm in the camp that we should target market median and then give ourselves enough grace on either side of that in establishing our pay range so that we feel comfortable that we're representative of the bigger market or where our market talent market is. The big players in any industry are going to continue to target P75. You're going to have those folks that do that, but the rest of us, I don't see the philosophy shifting because of the wild talent market. I just don't know that it's sustainable for companies to all shift, because all it's going to do is move your P50 up, right? So or down. You're just going to shift. The whole market's going to shift, and you're all going to be back at P50 again if we change our philosophy. So.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll add one thing there, Deonna. So
Sure.
One thing that we have seen change, at least at organizations I've been at, is the need to differentiate philosophy for certain countries, where we either are in growth mode and we need, to compete differently. And so that's one thing that I would say has been a pretty big change, is a kind of global philosophy that was consistent versus a more regional or country specific approach.
Yeah, I agree, Nicole. There was a point where we were chasing this interpolated value of market P65 and saying, hey, this is where we want to compete for talent. Increasingly, I think there's been a recognition that really you want to be a market P50 with a healthy range around that based on the kind of experience and other factors, and that really the only situations where we should be targeting specific premiums is in places around the world where it's critical to our business development strategy to target a different market positioning. And in those cases, it's fine to target P65, 75, 80, whatever it takes to grow the business in those markets.
So because you brought up different countries, I definitely want to get to this one. So do any of you have employees currently residing in Russia? If so, are you engaging them in any unique pay practices during this turbulent time?
We do have employees in Russia, about 30 or so. We have not engaged them in any unique or specific pay practices, but obviously, with the things going on, in that country at this time, there have been some things that have shaped the way that we've organized our business there. But no unique pay strategies aside from to be competitive the same way we would in the market.
Yeah, I think we only have one Russian employee there, but aside from that, I think the bigger impact to us was really in the deciding not to do business or sell to Russian customers. That has had a more significant impact on our sales incentive plans and making some decisions to allow for quota relief and other adjustments related to that. We've taken that business off the table. We're not going to hold those salespeople accountable for achieving results in that country. And so we've had to make adjustments on that side with regard to incentive plans.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about publishing compensation ranges, so specifically New York. So with New York law asking to publish comp ranges for the published requirement / job, and many states already having that law, how does the team plan to tackle this?
I would say that we already disclose ranges internally. Employees can go onto their job profile and see what the pay range is for their position. As a practical matter, we found that some of those things are dated and we're in the process of refreshing it. But I think that pay transparency is something that employees really value. As a practical matter, to Wendy's earlier point, you can most easily do that when you have a good story to tell. And we've done a lot of work around pay equity that's allowed us to be able to tell a good story there. And so I'd say that's the way that we're tackling it right now. Employees can see their ranges. If they have questions around pay, we can explain to them why that they're being paid competitively. And if they aren't, we need to do a review and adjust it.
I love like pay transparency in theory and am like terrified by it in practice, because compensation is so nuanced and both like employees and managers like fail with the nuance a lot. And so, I mean, I think it was just last night, like New York gave us a 6-month extension, which I'm very grateful for, because we're still trying to figure out, we know mechanically how to do it, but how do we manage the blowback in the business when people go and say, well, I see that the range says the minimum is 110 and I'm at 110. So, we're still trying to figure out how do we help tell the story, because the story is not bad. It's just nuanced,
And you said something earlier, Deonna, about someone who, when you tell them what the range is, that the people that are higher in the range or above, they'll be happy. My experience is that they won't be, because they're not going to believe you. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what you pay someone. I think it's human nature for us to value ourselves against that number and believe that it should be a little bit higher than it is, or believe that the market is higher than what we're telling. And that's the part that I struggle with. I agree with you, Nicole. It's terrifying to think that we're going to pull back the curtain and they're going to see us with all the levers like the Wizard of Oz, working behind the scenes. And it's that is intimidating. We've not had to deal with the disclosure in many states so far, and it's been pretty easy for us to answer employee questions around it, but it's going to get harder.
I will add that we disclose pay ranges internally and have for some time predating my time even with the company, and so I'm sure that cycle happened. But for what it's worth, I would say, sitting from where I'm sitting today, most of the time when I get pushback on pay issues from employees, it's not related to where they are sitting in a salary range. It's when they understand where they're sitting relative to a peer because they've had this conversation or that. And those tend to be the really difficult conversations. If somebody is sitting in a certain market position in the range and it's not necessarily at P50, because of the fact there are reasons that we have them sitting there, we can generally explain it. It's the conversations where you've got to explain to an employee why someone else is paid more competitively, and we don't even typically get into that level of detail on those sorts of comments, but that's where the employee relations noise tends to come in.
Well, one thing that I did with our senior leadership earlier this year, when we wanted to do a bunch of kind of market adjustments, like I said, proactive versus reactive. And so we created a rubric that kind of said, all right, if you've been in the role for this amount of time, and your performance ratings, which I know could have a point of bias, but are a metric, right? That your performance rating is X, then here's probably where in the range, like you should at least be here in the range. And so what we were trying to not only give something that's kind of consistent across the firm, but a way for managers to be able to talk about it, that like range placement is like a part of this and this, like we use these multiple things, and it's not just, well, I'm better than Sally, and so I should get paid more than Sally. Well, Sally's been in that role for 5 years, and you know what I mean? Like it's trying to get the managers to start thinking there's more behind it than just the number, right?
I will say one other thing I will say that does tend to be a challenge is if you've got a global leader that has employees that are sitting in markets or direct reports that are sitting in markets that are much higher cost of labor. In some cases, their pay can be very close to each other. Those sorts of conversations tend to be some of the more difficult ones to have in the organization. And that's a place where I found that the most effective way to drive those conversations is to really educate managers and help them understand our pay philosophy, that we're looking at labor markets and paying competitively based on that market. And if you sit in the UK, you have a direct report that sits in the US, the pay just may be closer. In some cases, there are even places where if you adjust it for your purchasing power. The person in the higher cost market might even be a little bit higher, but it's educating managers and having those conversations so that they can have a discussion with employees.
That leads to another question I think we had, but I want to, like, before I lose my train of thought on it, we have that issue a lot in technology too, like in technology specific roles, because you could have, you know, I'm at a SaaS company, and you kind of have your individual contributor track and you got your management track. And a lot of times you have individual contributors that are 20-year, you know, system architects that, you know, they have to make quite a bit more than their manager. And so a lot of that is like educating managers, making sure that the people you promote into that management track have the maturity to handle that. Because it's, you know, it's just a given in technology roles.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was so informative. I'm going to pass it over to Doug to close us out.
Thanks, Deonna, and really appreciate everyone joining today, and special thanks to our panelists. Feel free to connect with them directly via LinkedIn, and please check out our previous Halo events on our YouTube channel. We will keep everyone up to date on our future events, and we will be sending surveys out early next week to gather your feedback as we continue to iterate for future events. And again, thanks everyone, and hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.